Ambassador Zekthara had witnessed the rise and fall of 17 different civilizations during her 3 centuries of diplomatic service. She had seen species that could bend reality with their minds, races that lived in the heart of stars, and, being so ancient they remembered the birth of galaxies. None of them had ever made her feel the cold touch of genuine fear. Until she met the humans. The first contact had been routine. The Terran delegation arrived at Neutral Station Omega in a ship that looked like it had been cobbled together from spare parts and stubborn determination. Their ambassador, a middle-aged woman named Sarah Chen, smiled warmly and spoke in measured tones about peace, trade, and mutual understanding. Everything about them screamed harmless newcomers to the galactic community. Zekthara's people, the Veltar, were among the founding members of the Galactic Council. They had been exploring space when most species were still figuring out fire. Their technology was so advanced that they could reshape matter at the molecular level, travel faster than light without breaking the universe's rules, and had never lost a war in their recorded history. The humans, by comparison, had barely crawled out of their gravity well. "Your species shows promise," Zekthara had told Ambassador Chen during their first meeting. "We look forward to guiding you as you take your first steps into the greater galaxy." Sarah Chen had smiled that same warm smile. "We appreciate your offer, Ambassador. Though I think you might be surprised by how quickly we learn." That should have been Zekthara's first warning. The integration process began smoothly. Humans were granted limited membership in the Galactic Council, access to basic technology exchanges, and trading rights with a dozen species. They were curious, adaptable, and surprisingly creative in their solutions to problems. Their diplomatic corps was professional, their traders were honest, and their scientists asked intelligent questions. For 2 standard years, everything proceeded exactly as it had with dozens of other species. The humans established colonies on 3 worlds, built respectable trade relationships, and contributed to several joint scientific ventures. They were model citizens of the galaxy. Then, the Korthax Dominion decided to test the newcomers. The Korthax were not members of the Galactic Council, but they were tolerated as a necessary evil. They ruled a small empire on the galactic rim through fear and superior firepower. Their ships were fast, their weapons were deadly, and their tactics were ruthless. They made their living raiding weaker species, taking what they wanted, and disappearing before Council fleets could respond. When they hit the human colony on Kepler's Garden, everyone expected it to follow the usual pattern. The Korthax would sweep in, take whatever resources they could carry, enslave whoever they could sell, and be gone within days. The humans would file a complaint with the Council, receive sympathy and a promise of increased patrols, and that would be the end of it. But the humans didn't file a complaint. Instead, Ambassador Chen requested an emergency session of the Council. When the representatives gathered, she stood at the central podium with that same warm smile, but something was different about her eyes. "Honored delegates," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. 3 days ago, the Korthax Dominion attacked our colony on Kepler's Garden. They killed 47 civilians, including children, and took another 100 as slaves. The chamber filled with the usual murmurs of sympathy. Delegate Horth of the Zenthari Republic was already preparing his standard speech about the tragic realities of galactic politics when Chen continued. "We have requested that the Korthax return our people and provide reparations for the damage they've caused. They have refused." Her smile never wavered. "Therefore, as of this moment, humanity formally declares war on the Korthax Dominion." The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Council Prime Veltoric, a being so old his species was considered living history, found his voice. "Ambassador Chen, surely you understand that such a declaration requires careful consideration. The Korthax possess significant military capabilities, and your species lacks the experience necessary for interstellar warfare. Perhaps mediation would be more appropriate? With respect, Council Prime, mediation requires both parties to be willing to negotiate. The Korthax have made their position clear. They believe they can take our people and our resources with impunity." Chen's smile became something else entirely. "We intend to correct that misunderstanding." Zekthara felt something cold crawl up her spine. In 3 centuries of diplomacy, she had developed an instinct for reading between the lines of what people said. And everything about Sarah Chen's calm, measured tone was screaming danger. Ambassador, Zekthera interjected, the Korthax fleet consists of over 300 vessels, including several dreadnoughts. Your entire naval force consists of perhaps 50 ships, most of which are exploration vessels with minimal armaments. This is not a war you can win. Chen turned those unsettling eyes toward her. Ambassador Zekthera, you've been very kind to us since we joined the galactic community. Your people have shared technology, offered guidance, and treated us as valued partners. For that, humanity is grateful. She paused, and the silence stretched until it became uncomfortable. But I don't think you understand us as well as you believe you do. The session ended with the council voting to remain neutral in the conflict, as they always did when member species chose to engage in what they considered minor territorial disputes. The general consensus was that the humans would learn a hard lesson about galactic realities, hopefully without losing too many ships in the process. Zekthera returned to her quarters that evening with an uncomfortable feeling she couldn't quite identify. She accessed the diplomatic files on humanity, reading through the cultural analysis reports that had been compiled during first contact. The humans were classified as a moderately aggressive species with strong tribal instincts. They had a history of warfare, but so did most species. Their military technology was several generations behind galactic standards, their ships were slow, and their weapons were primitive. On paper, they posed no significant threat to anyone. But, as Zekthera read deeper into the files, certain details began to stand out. Humans were the only species on record who had developed nuclear weapons before achieving spaceflight. Most civilizations discovered atomic energy as part of their expansion into space. Humans had figured out how to split atoms specifically to kill each other more efficiently. Their planet's history was an unbroken chain of warfare stretching back to their earliest recorded civilization. They had fought with sticks and stones, then bronze and iron, then gunpowder and chemistry, then nuclear fire and guided missiles. Each new technology was immediately weaponized. But most disturbing was a small note in the cultural analysis section. Humans appear to be the only known species that regularly wages war against its own kind using the maximum level of violence available to them. Zekthera closed the file and stared out her window at the stars. Somewhere out there, a species that had spent its entire evolutionary history perfecting the art of killing was preparing for war against raiders who thought they were easy prey. For the first time in her very long life, she wondered if the Galactic Council had made a terrible mistake in classifying the humans as harmless. The attack on the Korthax came exactly 72 hours after Chen's declaration of war. It wasn't the gradual buildup of forces that most species employed when preparing for conflict. It wasn't a carefully planned campaign with defined objectives and rules of engagement. It was something else entirely. The first reports came from Korthax patrol ships on the edges of their territory. They had detected human vessels approaching their borders and moved to intercept, expecting to brush aside a few exploration ships with delusions of grandeur. Instead, they found themselves facing something that defied everything the galaxy thought it knew about warfare. The human ships were different. Not upgraded or improved versions of their original designs, but completely new vessels that looked like they had been purpose-built for a single objective: killing. They were angular, brutal things that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They moved with predatory grace, and, when they opened fire, they did so with weapons that had never appeared in any intelligence report. The patrol ships vanished without sending a distress signal. Within 6 hours, 3 more Korthax squadrons had gone silent. The Dominion's military command began to take notice, reassigning vessels from raiding operations to defend their territory. They were facing what appeared to be a significant human fleet, larger and more advanced than anything their intelligence suggested was possible. But, as reports continued to filter in, a disturbing pattern emerged. The human ships weren't following any recognizable tactical doctrine. They didn't establish supply lines, they didn't fortify positions, and they didn't seem interested in occupying territory. They just kept killing. Korthax Admiral Grook, a veteran of 300 battles across 4 decades, found himself staring at tactical displays that made no sense. Human ships would appear out of nowhere, destroy everything in their path, and vanish before reinforcements could arrive. They struck mining operations, military bases, civilian transports, and communication relays with equal brutality. "What do they want?" he demanded of his intelligence staff. The answer, when it came, was more disturbing than anything he could have imagined. "Sir, based on intercepts of their communications, they don't appear to want anything. They're not demanding surrender, they're not trying to capture territory, and they're not taking prisoners." Admiral Grook felt something cold settle in his stomach. "What are they doing with survivors?" "Sir, there haven't been any survivors. The war lasted 18 days. When it ended, the Korthax Dominion had ceased to exist. Not defeated, not conquered, but completely erased. 300 ships, 27 military installations, 46 colonies, and approximately 12 million Korthax had simply vanished into the dark. The humans had accomplished something that the combined might of the Galactic Council had never attempted: the complete annihilation of an entire interstellar civilization. And they had done it in less than 3 weeks. The aftermath was a study in controlled chaos. Human ships appeared at Neutral Station Omega carrying exactly 147 individuals, the colonists who had been taken from Kepler's garden, alive and unharmed. Ambassador Chen stood once again before the Galactic Council, wearing that same warm smile, as if she had just concluded a successful trade negotiation rather than orchestrated genocide. "The Korthax Dominion has been neutralized," she reported matter-of-factly. "Our people have been recovered, and the threat to peaceful commerce in this sector has been eliminated." The silence in the chamber was absolute. Finally, Council Prime Veltoric found his voice. "Ambassador Chen, what exactly happened to the Korthax?" "They were removed," Chen replied, as if the question confused her. "They posed a threat to innocent civilians and refused to negotiate in good faith. We dealt with the problem. But where are they? What happened to their colonies? Their civilians?" Chen's smile never wavered. "They are no longer a concern." That night, Zekthara sat in her quarters, staring at intelligence reports that painted a picture too horrible to fully comprehend. The humans hadn't just defeated the Korthax, they had systematically hunted down every single member of their species across dozens of star systems. They had located hidden bases, tracked fleeing civilians, and found ships that had been traveling in hyperspace. They had been thorough in a way that spoke of long experience and careful planning. But most disturbing of all was the speed with which they had mobilized. The ships they had used in the war were completely different from anything they had shown the galaxy during first contact. The weapons, the tactics, the sheer scale of their response, none of it matched the peaceful, curious species that had asked for guidance just 2 years earlier. Which meant that somewhere in human space, they had been building a war machine that could erase civilizations from existence. And they had been building it while smiling and talking about peace and mutual understanding. Zekthara realized that the humans had never been the harmless newcomers they pretended to be. They were something else entirely, a species that had spent millennia learning how to kill, disguised as diplomats and traders and explorers. For the first time in her 3 centuries of life, Ambassador Zekthara understood what the emotion called dread actually meant. And, somewhere in the back of her mind, a terrible question began to form: if the humans could do this to the Korthax in 18 days, what could they do to the rest of the galaxy if they ever decided it was necessary? The thought kept her awake for many nights to come. The weeks following the Korthax incident brought an uncomfortable calm to the Galactic Council chambers. Representatives spoke in hushed tones about trade agreements and scientific exchanges, but everyone was thinking about the same thing: the empty space where an entire civilization used to exist. Commander Thekval of the Zenthari Republic had served as military liaison to the Council for 40 years. He had studied every major conflict in recorded galactic history, analyzed the tactics of 100 different species, and prided himself on understanding the nature of warfare better than any living being in the galaxy. The human campaign against the Korthax had shattered every assumption he thought he understood about combat. He found himself obsessing over the tactical reports, trying to piece together how a species barely 2 years into galactic society had managed something that defied explanation. The humans had deployed technologies that didn't exist in their public databases, used strategies that had no historical precedent, and coordinated an operation across multiple star systems with precision that suggested decades of experience. But what haunted him most was the efficiency of it all. The Zenthuri were considered the galaxy's premier military force. Their war college was legendary, their officers were trained for decades before seeing combat, and their strategic doctrine had been refined over centuries of conflict. When the Zenthuri went to war, it was a careful, methodical process that minimized casualties and maximized strategic gain. The humans had approached warfare like exterminators dealing with an infestation. 3 weeks after the Korthax disappeared, Commander Thekval received an unexpected visitor in his office aboard the Council flagship. Ambassador Sarachin stood in his doorway, still wearing that unsettling smile. "Commander, I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." Thekval gestured to a chair, noting how Chen's eyes immediately catalogued every piece of equipment in his office, every potential weapon, every exit. "Not at all, Ambassador. What can I do for you?" "I wanted to discuss military cooperation between our species. The Zenthuri have an impressive reputation, and humanity values learning from experienced allies." The request should have been routine. New species often sought military exchanges with established powers as part of their integration process. But something about Chen's tone made Thekval's combat instincts scream danger. "What kind of cooperation did you have in mind? Joint training exercises, perhaps? Technology exchange? Strategic discussions?" Chen leaned forward slightly. "We're particularly interested in your deep space patrol tactics. The galaxy can be a dangerous place, and we want to make sure we're properly prepared to protect our interests." Thekval studied her carefully. "Ambassador, with respect, your recent demonstration against the Korthax suggests your people already possess considerable military capabilities. What could we possibly teach you?" Chen's smile widened. "Commander, the Korthax were pirates and raiders. Brutal, but predictable. They fought like animals, all aggression and no strategy. We're interested in learning how civilized species approach warfare." The word sent ice through Thekval's veins. The casual way she dismissed the complete annihilation of a civilization as a warm-up exercise was more terrifying than any threat could have been. "I'll need to consult with my superiors," he managed. "Of course. Take your time." Chen rose to leave, then paused at the door. "Oh, Commander? You might want to review the tactical recordings from our engagement with the Korthax. I think you'll find them educational." After she left, Thekval sat in silence for several minutes before accessing his secure terminal. He had indeed reviewed those recordings, over and over, trying to understand what he was seeing. Now he pulled them up again, this time looking for something specific. The human ships moved with a coordination that spoke of extensive training. They anticipated enemy movements with uncanny accuracy. They exploited weaknesses in Korthax formations that shouldn't have been obvious to newcomers. Most disturbing of all, they had known exactly where to find every hidden base, every secret facility, every escape route the Korthax might use. That level of intelligence required years of preparation. Which meant the humans had been planning for interstellar warfare long before they made first contact with the galaxy. Commander Thekval reached for his communication console with a trembling hand. The Zenthuri High Command needed to hear about this immediately. Meanwhile, on the human colony ship New Horizon, Dr. Elena Vasquez was having her own disturbing revelations. As the expedition's chief xenobiologist, she had been tasked with studying the various alien species humanity had encountered since joining the galactic community. What she was discovering in their genetic databases was keeping her awake at night. The Veltar, with their advanced technology and peaceful demeanor, had evolutionary markers indicating they had been apex predators for millions of years before developing intelligence. The Zenthuri military tradition wasn't learned behavior, it was encoded in their DNA through countless generations of warfare. Even the peaceful Horth showed genetic adaptations for surviving in extremely competitive environments. Every single species in the galaxy was the evolutionary product of violence. Except the ones that weren't in the galaxy anymore. Elena had been cross-referencing archaeological records from various worlds, looking for patterns in how civilizations rose and fell. What she found was a consistent theme: peaceful species disappeared from the historical record with startling regularity. Sometimes they were conquered, sometimes they were absorbed into other civilizations, and sometimes they simply vanished without explanation. But the violent species, the predators and warriors and survivors, they endured. The galaxy wasn't a peaceful community of enlightened beings sharing knowledge and resources. It was an ecosystem where only the strong survived, and everyone else was pretending otherwise. Elena's research had been academic until she stumbled across a classified report from Earth's Strategic Defense Initiative. The file was heavily redacted, but what remained was enough to make her question everything she thought she knew about humanity's place in the galaxy. Project Damocles had been initiated within months of first contact. While diplomats were smiling and shaking hands with alien ambassadors, military planners were analyzing every piece of information about galactic civilization and drawing some very uncomfortable conclusions. The report's summary was brutally direct: galactic society operates under a facade of peaceful cooperation that masks a fundamentally predatory hierarchy. Species survival depends on the credible ability to inflict unacceptable costs on potential aggressors. Recommend immediate military preparation for inevitable conflict. Elena felt sick as she read deeper into the file. Humanity hadn't joined the galactic community seeking knowledge and friendship. They had joined it seeking intelligence about potential enemies. And they had been preparing for war from day one. The real revelation came when she accessed the technical specifications for the ships that had destroyed the Korthax. The designs weren't new, they were based on concepts that had been in development since before first contact. Humanity had been building a war fleet while pretending to be peaceful explorers. But, most chilling of all was a single line buried deep in the tactical assessment: current force projection capabilities adequate for neutralizing threats up to Class 7 galactic civilizations. Recommend continued expansion to achieve parity with Council military assets. Elena realized that the Korthax hadn't been humanity's first test of their military capabilities. They had been the first target weak enough to destroy without revealing the true extent of human preparations. Her hand shook as she copied the files to a secure drive. Someone needed to know what humanity was really planning. The question was, who could she trust with information that could start a galaxy-wide war? On the other side of the galaxy, Ambassador Zekthera was dealing with her own crisis of understanding. The Veltar Council of Wisdom had tasked her with conducting a comprehensive assessment of human capabilities following the Korthax incident. What she was discovering challenged everything she thought she knew about the nature of intelligence and civilization. The humans were adaptable in ways that defied explanation. They had gone from primitive chemical rockets to faster-than-light travel in less than 2 centuries. They had developed artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and genetic engineering with a speed that suggested they approached technological advancement like a military campaign. But it was their cultural adaptability that truly alarmed her. Every other species in the galaxy had consistent behavioral patterns shaped by their evolutionary history. The Veltar were naturally curious and methodical. The Zenthari were disciplined and hierarchical. The Horth were cooperative and consensus-driven. These patterns remained constant across different environments and situations. Humans changed. When they were dealing with peaceful species, they were diplomatic and cooperative. When they encountered traitors, they became shrewd negotiators. When they met scientists, they transformed into eager students. And, when they faced threats, they became something else entirely. It was as if humanity didn't have a fixed nature at all, but rather the ability to become whatever was most advantageous in any given situation. Zekthera found herself wondering if humans were actually multiple species wearing the same physical form, or if they were something far more dangerous, a species that had evolved to be the perfect mimics. Her investigation led her to request access to Earth's historical databases. What she found there made her question whether the Galactic Council had made a fundamental error in their assessment of human psychology. Human history wasn't just violent, it was strategically violent. They didn't fight random conflicts, they fought systematic campaigns designed to eliminate threats and expand their capabilities. They had developed philosophy and art and science not in spite of their warlike nature, but because of it. Every advancement in human knowledge had been immediately applied to the problem of killing their enemies more efficiently. But, most disturbing was their approach to deception. Humans had elevated lying to an art form. They called it diplomacy, espionage, psychological warfare, and propaganda, but, at its core, it was all the same thing: the ability to convince others to act against their own interests. And, they had been practicing this art on the galactic community for 2 years. Zekthera began to see the human integration process in a new light. They hadn't been learning about galactic civilization out of curiosity, they had been gathering intelligence. Their trade relationships weren't just economic partnerships, they were infiltration networks. Their scientific collaborations weren't just knowledge exchange, they were technology theft. Every human action since first contact had been designed to make them appear harmless while they prepared for war. The final piece of the puzzle came when Zekthera accessed the communication logs from human diplomatic ships. The messages were encrypted, but Veltar quantum computers could break any encryption given enough time. What they revealed was a coordinated intelligence operation that had been mapping every aspect of galactic civilization since the day humans arrived. Military capabilities, economic resources, political structures, technological weaknesses, the humans had been systematically cataloging everything they would need to know to wage war against any species in the galaxy. Zekthera realized with growing horror that humanity hadn't joined the galactic community seeking peace and prosperity. They had joined it seeking targets. The Korthax had just been the first name crossed off their list. As reports filtered in from across the galaxy, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. Human trading ships were showing up in systems that had previously been considered too dangerous or remote for commerce. Human exploration vessels were charting regions of space that had no apparent scientific value. Human diplomats were asking questions about military protocols and defense capabilities. Humanity was expanding their presence throughout the galaxy with purpose and determination that suggested they weren't planning to remain junior partners in galactic civilization for very long. And everyone was beginning to realize that the pleasant, cooperative species they had welcomed into the community might be something far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The question was no longer whether humanity posed a threat to galactic peace. The question was how long the galaxy had before they decided to do something about it. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was called 6 months after the Korthax disappeared. Representatives from 43 species gathered in the Great Chamber of Neutral Station Omega, but the atmosphere was nothing like the collegial discussions that usually characterized council meetings. Fear hung in the air like a toxic gas, and everyone knew why they were there. The humans had to be dealt with. Council Prime Veltorek looked older than his considerable years as he called the session to order. Fellow representatives, we gather today to address concerns that have been raised about the human member state and their recent activities. Ambassador Zekthera rose from her seat, her usually steady voice carrying a slight tremor. Council Prime, over the past 6 months, my government has compiled extensive intelligence on human operations throughout our territory. What we have discovered suggests that humanity poses an existential threat to galactic civilization. The chamber erupted in nervous chatter. Representatives who had been whispering their fears in private corridors were finally hearing their worst suspicions voiced in public. The humans have been systematically infiltrating our societies, Zekthera continued. Their trade networks are intelligence-gathering operations. Their cultural exchanges are recruitment programs. Their scientific collaborations are technology theft on a massive scale. They have been preparing for conquest since the day they arrived. Commander Thekval of the Zenthari stood to support her claims. My analysis of human military capabilities confirms Ambassador Zekthera's assessment. The force they deployed against the Korthax represents only a fraction of their true strength. We estimate they could field a fleet capable of challenging any council member within months. More voices joined the discussion, each adding another piece to a puzzle that painted humanity as wolves in sheep's clothing. The evidence was overwhelming, the conclusions inescapable. The humans were not what they seemed. But, as the representatives debated response options, none of them noticed the small figure sitting quietly in the observer's gallery. Dr. Elena Vesquez had been listening to the proceedings through a translation device, and what she was hearing filled her with both relief and terror. Relief that someone else had finally seen through humanity's carefully constructed facade. Terror at what her species was apparently planning to do with the intelligence they had gathered. Elena had spent months trying to find someone who would listen to her concerns about Project Damocles and the true nature of human expansion into galactic space. The classified files she had discovered painted a picture of systematic preparation for what could only be described as a conquest campaign. But, when she had tried to raise her concerns through official channels, she had been quietly reassigned to a research position on a remote mining station. The message was clear: her government wanted her isolated and silent. Now, listening to the council debate whether humanity posed a threat to galactic peace, she realized that someone else had done the investigation she had been prevented from completing. The question was whether it was already too late to do anything about it. As the session continued, one voice was notably absent from the discussion. Ambassador Sarah Chen had not been invited to participate in a debate about her own species. But Elena noticed that several human trade representatives and cultural attaches were present in the observers' gallery, quietly recording everything that was said. Humanity was gathering intelligence even as the galaxy's leaders discussed what to do about them. The debate raged for hours. Some representatives argued for immediate military action, insisting that humanity needed to be contained before they could launch whatever campaign they were planning. Others pushed for diplomatic solutions, believing that open confrontation might provoke the very war they were trying to prevent. But, underlying every argument was a growing sense of panic. The galaxy's major powers had spent centuries believing they understood the rules of interstellar civilization. Species joined the council, they integrated gradually, they found their place in the established hierarchy, and everyone benefited from peaceful cooperation. Humanity had taken those rules and weaponized them. The session was interrupted when an aide rushed into the chamber and whispered something urgent into Council Prime Veltorek's ear. His face went pale as he listened, and, when he spoke, his voice carried a note of barely controlled fear. "Representatives, I have just received word that 3 Council patrol fleets have lost contact with their command structures. The last transmissions from Fleet Admiral Korvac's task force indicated they were investigating unusual energy signatures in the Outer Rim." The silence that followed was deafening. Commander Thekvel was the first to speak. "Council Prime, those fleets were positioned along the borders of human space." Before anyone could respond, the chamber's communication system activated. Ambassador Sarah Chen's face appeared on the main display, still wearing that same warm smile that had fooled them all for so long. "Council Prime, honored representatives, I apologize for interrupting your session, but I felt it was important to address the concerns that have been raised about my species." Veltorek found his voice. "Ambassador Chen, where are our patrol fleets?" "They are safe and unharmed, Council Prime. We have taken them into protective custody pending resolution of this unfortunate misunderstanding." Chen's smile never wavered. "I want to assure you that humanity has no hostile intentions toward the Galactic Council or its member species." "Then, release our ships immediately," Commander Thekvel demanded. "I'm afraid that's not possible at this time. You see, we intercepted communications indicating that several council members were planning military action against human territory. We simply cannot allow our people to be threatened while we attempt to resolve this diplomatically." The implications hit the assembled representatives like a physical blow. 3 entire fleets, hundreds of ships, thousands of personnel, all captured without anyone even knowing a battle had taken place. If humanity could do that to the galaxy's premier military forces, what chance did anyone else have? "What do you want?" Veltorek asked quietly. "Nothing unreasonable, Council Prime. Simply a formal acknowledgement of humanity's status as a full member of the Galactic Council, with all the rights and privileges that entails. And, perhaps some adjustments to the current territorial agreements to better reflect the reality of our capabilities." Zekthara felt her species' legendary composure finally crack. "You're demanding we surrender to your conquest." Chen's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in her eyes. "Ambassador Zekthara, conquest implies taking something by force. We prefer to think of this as a negotiated transition to a more equitable arrangement. And, if we refuse? Then, you will have chosen to place the galaxy in a state of active warfare. And, I think we all know how that would end. The transmission ended, leaving the council chamber in stunned silence. For the first time in galactic history, a member species had openly threatened the established order. And, everyone present knew they had the power to make good on that threat. Dr. Elena Vasquez slipped out of the observer's gallery and made her way to a secure communication terminal. She had to warn someone, anyone, about what humanity was really planning. But, as she activated the terminal, she found herself facing a human security officer who had been waiting for her. Dr. Vasquez, you're required to report for immediate transport back to Earth. Director's orders. Elena felt her heart sink as she realized that her government had been monitoring her all along. They knew she had discovered Project Damocles. They knew she had been trying to warn the galaxy. And, now they were making sure she couldn't interfere with their plans. As she was escorted to the human transport ship, Elena caught a glimpse of the main docking bay. Human vessels were arriving at the station in unprecedented numbers, all of them carrying the angular, predatory design that had marked the ships used against the Korthax. Humanity wasn't just threatening the galaxy. They were already positioning forces for what came next. Back in the council chamber, representatives from dozens of species struggled to process what had just happened. The comfortable illusion of galactic peace had been shattered, replaced by the brutal reality that they were now subjects of a species they had vastly underestimated. Commander Thekval was the first to break the silence. How many ships do we have left? The question hung in the air like a death sentence. The three captured fleets had represented nearly 30% of the Council's total military strength. The remaining forces were scattered across thousands of star systems, maintaining peace and order throughout the galaxy. And every one of them was now hopelessly outgunned. We need to contact our home governments, Veltorek said finally. They need to know what we're facing. But, as the representatives began activating their communication equipment, they discovered that the subspace networks were no longer responding. The galaxy's communication infrastructure, built and maintained by the Council over centuries, had somehow been compromised. They were cut off from their civilizations, trapped on a neutral station that was rapidly filling with human warships. Ambassador Zekthera felt the last of her diplomatic composure desert her as the full scope of humanity's preparation became clear. This hadn't been a spontaneous power grab triggered by the Council's investigation. It had been a carefully orchestrated campaign that had been in motion since the day humans first arrived. Every trade agreement had been designed to create dependency. Every cultural exchange had been intended to identify key individuals and institutions. Every scientific collaboration had been meant to map the galaxy's infrastructure and defenses. And, now, with surgical precision, humanity was dismantling the entire structure of galactic civilization. Within hours, reports began filtering in from across the galaxy. Human forces were simultaneously occupying strategic positions throughout Council space. Key communication nodes, military installations, and industrial centers were being secured by troops who seemed to know exactly where to find them. The conquest was happening so fast and so efficiently that most species didn't even realize they were being invaded until it was over. But what terrified the Council representatives most wasn't the speed or the precision of the human campaign. It was the restraint. Despite overwhelming superiority, the humans weren't engaging in the wholesale slaughter that usually accompanied galactic conflicts. They were capturing, not destroying. Occupying, not annihilating. They were conquering the galaxy the same way they had joined it, with careful planning, overwhelming force, and just enough deception to keep their true intentions hidden until it was too late to resist. As night fell over Neutral Station Omega, the assembled representatives of 43 civilizations found themselves prisoners in all but name. The humans maintained the fiction that they were honored guests participating in negotiations, but armed guards stood at every exit, and their communications remained severed. Ambassador Zekthera stood at the observation deck, looking out at the growing fleet of human warships surrounding the station. She had spent 3 centuries believing that diplomacy and reason could solve any conflict, that intelligent beings could always find common ground. Now she understood that she had been naive. Humanity hadn't come to the galaxy seeking peace or knowledge or friendship. They had come seeking conquest. And they had been patient enough to spend years preparing for this moment, smart enough to make themselves appear harmless until they were ready to strike, and ruthless enough to do whatever was necessary to achieve their goals. As she watched another wave of human ships emerge from hyperspace, Ambassador Zekthara finally understood what the emotion called dread actually meant. And, somewhere in the depths of space, the greatest military machine the galaxy had ever seen was completing the conquest of an entire civilization while its victims remained convinced they were still participating in diplomatic negotiations. The age of human dominance had begun.